Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this very special panel discussion on the underrepresentation of BAME people in professional football. My name is Leon Mann. I'm a founding member of the Sports People's Think Tank. I also occasionally do a bit of broadcasting for the BBC and also ITV Sport. I'm delighted to be joined by a star-studded panel this afternoon. Starting from left to right, we have one of the world's leading academics in the diversity of football, Dr. Steven Bradbury from the University of Loughborough. You can clap if you like. Thank you.
Really, don't.
Next up, we have sports presenter and a big campaigner for equality and diversity, Jessica Crichton. We also have SPTT founding member and Derby County Club ambassador, Michael Johnson. And also Manchester United legend and also club ambassador, which is important, Andrew Cole. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the SPTT, just for you guys who may not know about the Sports People's Think Tank. We were set up in 2014 by former and current sports people who wanted to have a voice, a united voice, have an opinion on things that were happening across sport. And they wanted to base that not just on opinion, but on academic research. So our first report was on BAME coaches and managers, and that was conducted by Dr. Steven Bradbury, who's with us today, in association with the FAIR Network. And to start this session, I'd like to kick off by giving Steven Bradbury the floor to give you a snapshot of what the situation is with BAME representation in coaching and management. Steven.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I really just wanted to take 5 minutes just to kind of lay out the research landscape, really, and give you a picture of facts and figures and some of the kind of experiences of BME coaches in relation to the levels of representation of coaches from BME backgrounds in English football. We know, researchers has told us, that there are traditionally low levels of BME coaches in senior coaching positions within the game in England. Research conducted in 2016 suggested that just 20 out of 493 senior coaching positions in the game, around 4%, were held by coaches from BME backgrounds. And that figure has remained fairly constant over time. In terms of coach education, research undertaken a few years ago in 2014 indicated that there were around 8% of all coaches from BME backgrounds holding UEFA B, UEFA A, Advanced Youth or Pro License awards, so that tranche of elite level coaching awards. We need to kind of locate that in terms of the wider levels of representation of BME groups within the game. As players, around 30%, and within the broader population of the UK, around 15%. So those figures of 4% and 8% respectively start to look quite small in comparison. Research conducted by myself, interviews with a whole tranche of BME coaches who were involved in the game as players, who retired as players at any point between 1990 and 2010, indicated a number of key explanations for those low levels of representation. Firstly, they reported on limited access to and sometimes negative experiences of the high-level coach education environment, both in terms of not being identified or supported to attend and undertake elite level coaching qualifications, and also in terms of some of the experiences that they had, differential treatment within that elite level coaching or coach education environment. Perhaps the main factor was the over-reliance on networks-based approaches to the recruitment of coaches at professional football clubs, a case of who you know rather than what you know, reflective perhaps of business far beyond the football landscape. Thirdly, there were issues around conscious or unconscious racial bias and stereotyping that took place within the coaching workplace, a case of not what you know, but who they think you are. So the tendency, especially for black coaches, to be falsely conceptualized in terms of their assumed racial self rather than their actualized professional self. So bringing into play issues around attitude or competence rather than their qualifications and experience in a way in which wasn't transferred to the review of white coaches. Put simply, if you are a black coach, you are always a black coach. If you are a white coach, you are simply a coach. And finally, that lack of BME representation, the lack of BME role models, had led to, or had a knock-on effect on the continued underrepresentation of BME coaches. As one coach put it to me, why play the game if the game is rigged? Why take my qualifications if there isn't job opportunities at the end of it? Now, that research that we conducted, I think, provides a kind of robust account of the historical situation, of how it is that we've got to the point at which we are presently at. The extent to which those reasons hold weight in terms of the present situation, I think needs further exploration. And that brings me, I think, to a point that I wanted to make about, I think perhaps we are on the cusp of change. And I say that in part because of some of the high-profile campaigning that's been taking place, but also because of some of the new interventions that some of the football authorities have put into place in the last 12 to 18 months. And I'll speak firstly in terms of coach education and in relation to the FA's coach bursary programme. That coach bursary programme has, over the last 12 months or more, provided financial support to support BME coaches to get their UEFA B, UEFA A, Advanced Youth and Pro licence. Around 140 coaches are in that system and receiving funding and support over the last 12 months. And that will continue on for the next 5 years. The FA have commissioned an independent evaluation of that programme. I know that. I am the independent evaluator. And I sent my end of first year report to the FA yesterday. So I'm sure you can understand I can't speak publicly about the findings until the FA have had a chance to read them. But broadly speaking, those findings are positive. Beyond coach education and in terms of coach employment, we need to take into consideration the EFL's codes of recruitment, which came into place last year with a view to ensuring greater transparency in coach recruitment, to ensure that at least one suitably qualified BME candidate was granted at least an interview for emerging positions. And that has two elements to it. It has the mandatory code, which is in relation to youth academies, and the voluntary code in relation to first team level. Initial evaluation of that programme produced by the Football League suggests some room for cautious optimism and some initial kind of progress on that score. Our own research in this area at Loughborough is ongoing and would validate that kind of initial cautious optimism. And I just wanted to kind of finish by saying ultimately the success or the sustainability of the success of those interventions will be based on a number of key issues. Firstly, the rigorous implementation of those initiatives and the ways in which they have been designed. Secondly, strong organisational buy-in is needed from clubs and significant attitudinal change at clubs to be open to make those initiatives work. And finally, I would say that for those initiatives to work and for real sustainable change, meaningful change to happen, there needs to be perhaps much more holistic, joined-up thinking and working together on the part of the football authorities to take the enhanced employability of coaches and to turn it into realised or realisable employment opportunities. And so whilst I think the work of the FA and the Football League should be, and the PFA and the LMA too, should be commended in that sense, there is of course one organisation who remain completely absent from this debate, and that is the English Premier League. How much more might they need to do to ensure the change that we all want to see? And that is where I'm going to leave that. Thank you.
Dr. Bradbury, thank you so much for those thoughts. Andrew, cautious optimism. You famously said in 2011, I was reading, why would I bother doing my coaching badges? I don't see people like me getting opportunities. Given what you've heard, Have you changed your position? How are you feeling about this?
Have I changed my position? No. I still stand by what I said in 2011. Fair enough, the past 12 months there might have been a little progress, but we're not talking 12 months. We're talking numerous amount of years now. So if 12 months is good to go by, well, it's good to go by in their eyes. But for me personally, no, I can't see the change at all.
If we were sat here today talking about not 3 black managers, and yesterday Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank got a job, so that made it 3. If we were talking about 20 black managers, would you have a different viewpoint?
If we was talking about 20, of course I'd have a different viewpoint. But realistically, are we going to see 20? I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime.
Your lifetime?
I don't think it happened in my lifetime. We're talking 20 managers. No, I would be very, very surprised. Very surprised.
Let me push you a bit more on that.
Yeah, of course.
Why not?
Why not? Because I think people need to open their minds, and I just touched on there, we're not just black players, you know, black coaches. We're individuals, you know. When I watch the boys coach or whatever, I never thought as my manager or as a coach, as a white manager, he's my coach, he's my manager. But the perception about us is totally different, man. You know, so until the mindset changes on individuals, I think we're going to stuck in this, very stuck in this.
Do you think partly this is, I mean, what can we do as a black community? What does the game need to do in terms of the people who are in charge of making change in football?
I don't think it's a case of black community. I think when black players play at the highest level, I think what they're expecting to be given the same opportunity as their white counterparts, it's as simple as that. You know, I think when we find difficulty in leaving the game and trying to get into coaching or trying to get into management, it's very disappointing the response we get. So when you see so many ex-black players turn their back on football and everyone asks you the question, well, why have you done that? Well, it speaks volumes because you're not given an opportunity. You know, and when we talk about, you know, we're going to be given an interview, well, we can all have an interview. I mean, well, what does that interview actually mean? For me personally, it doesn't mean a lot. You know, we can all sit down and speak with individuals, but all it is an interview.
Thank you. Michael, I'm going to come to you next. You've been at the forefront of campaigning for change with the SPTT and as an individual as well.
Yeah.
You're also one of the most qualified coaches going. You know, there's not a coaching qualification I don't think that you don't have. What's been your personal experience of trying to get on the ladder? And, you know, do you sense things may be changing?
First of all, let me just say this, that I think it's sad that in 2017, we're having to introduce codes to allow a human being to get an opportunity, to force somebody to have a look at somebody based on somebody's colour, skin, or ethnicity. That shouldn't be the case in 2017. You should be judged on what you do as a human being. So I think that needs to be spoken about. My journey, I think it's been very slow. Fully qualified, sent over 50 applications. I've had an handful of interviews. And never once have I got through to the final stage. Out of the 5 interviews I had one piece of feedback that offered me some advice going forward. Does that encourage me to go further? No. And you can only be honest to players who are now leaving the game and talking about your experiences and saying it's difficult. It is really difficult to re-energise yourself and go again. The governing bodies need to do more. I think there's a lot of separation, there's a lot of silos. What should happen is the game should come together and trying to work out the best way forward to improve the situation. And look, we all know there's a situation. There's no getting away from it. When you see the amount of players that are currently playing the game, the players that are coming out the game, how does that not transfer itself into leadership positions? There's less than 1% in the senior positions of English football. Less than 1%. We're talking about our 3rd manager, 3 out of 92. And we're looking to celebrate the 3rd one going. It's not good enough. But this can go on next year and next year and next year, unless there's some serious implications, unless people really feel a need to do something about the situation, because it's not good enough.
Jess, the media play an important role here, don't they, in terms of underlining the seriousness of this issue, in some way maybe pushing the governing bodies by embarrassing them in some way. We've seen Jimmy get a job yesterday. We haven't seen many articles about the lack of black managers and coaches. Are the media doing a good enough job, and what more can they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. In short, no, the media aren't doing a good enough job, and I think that's directly related to the fact that if you go into any media newsroom in the UK, it's not diverse. There's a lack of women, there's a lack of people of colour, there's a lack of LGBT representation, there's just a lack of every kind of marginalised group that makes up the UK. And because of that, you don't get a diversity of ideas. Now, when I do talk about diversity, this includes white people as well. How many times on a TV station have you heard a regional accent? There's people that might be from a different part of the country that speak with a southern accent because it's been taken out of them and they think that that's what they need to broadcast. It affects white people too. How many times do you see a white person that hasn't been to Oxbridge on the TV? When I talk about diversity, I mean also a diversity of ideas, of upbringings, of experiences. That isn't defined by race necessarily. Because there isn't that in the newsroom, there aren't enough people challenging the stories that are going out there. And the language as well that's used is often insensitive or doesn't take into consideration different races, different religions, different sexual orientations. So no, it's not good enough at the moment. And the media needs to do a lot more in challenging the hierarchy and challenging those that are in power to ensure that the workforce is a lot more inclusive.
Media need to do more. I also want to touch on this with you, Jess, because when we talk about football, we tend to just talk about men's football. There is women's football. You've played for Charlton Women, so you know all about that side of the game. A long time ago, but you look like you could still play now. Come on. What are the issues in women's football? Are there similar issues? I mean, of course, we had Hope Powell, who is a very visible black female coach for the England team. But what are the issues in the women's game, if there are any?
Yeah, in terms of the women's game, it often does get overlooked, which is, I find, very, very frustrating. It needs to be encapsulated. It needs to be included under the umbrella of football. Sometimes we need to stop separating it by gender. It does have a lot of issues, and I feel the issues aren't necessarily widely known because women's football tends to fall under the radar quite often to men's football. There are issues, I think, with race and even with gender inequality. So the top kind of leagues in the women's game is the FA WSL, the Women's Super League, 1 and 2. So there's 10 teams in each league, and out of those 20 teams, by my reckoning, I think 6 are women, which I think is quite poor. And as far as I'm aware, there's only one of those coaches, head coaches, that is of colour, which I think is Hope Powell, who is at Brighton. That's not good enough. That doesn't suggest to me that the women's game is thinking about diversity. It doesn't suggest to me that the women's game wants a more inclusive workforce. It doesn't suggest to me that the women's game wants more inclusive players. And because of that, you get issues where, quite high-profile issues, as you'll know at the moment, where there is certain language used and terminology used that is probably unacceptable. And there isn't necessarily a way to address it because the diversity, the lack of knowledge and the lack of diversity means that things can go unchallenged and things aren't dealt with quickly and how they need to be dealt with. And I think we've seen that play out recently in the news with the England women's manager.
So the title of this session is Addressing Underrepresentation in the Professional Game. So what we're going to do, guys, because we've been talking about this from when I used to have no grey hairs and I've got plenty now. We've been talking about this since I've seen all you guys playing pretty much. So where do we go from here? What are the solutions? What's working? Michael, maybe if we start with you in terms of what's been working with what the SPTT have been doing, these academic research that we've been doing with Dr. Bradbury, with the Fair Network. You know, we've got to a place where we're now beginning, you know, Dr. Bradbury is telling us there are things that are beginning to look like they're happening, particularly in the academy area. You know, what more should we be doing? What more can people here help to be doing to move us forward?
I think there's always supporting the campaign and the lobbying of what SPTT and other organisations like ourselves are doing. And whilst it's great what's happening in the academy, whilst it's great that we are getting a workforce ready to go and challenge for position in the academies, I would like to see that represented in what's happening at first team level, what's happening at the leadership level of the game. Because ultimately, as Jess said, the decisions are made at the leadership level. And until that is represented by a fair workforce of women, people of different ethnicity, you're always going to get this struggle because there's always certain people just making the decisions that affect the whole organisation. So I applaud the efforts of the FA and the Football League in regards to the academy now looking at a lot more represented workforce. But that still needs to filter itself to the top end of the game.
And who holds the key to that, Michael? I'm going to put you on the spot now. Who holds the key? Who's the person that is preventing this happening? Not person, people, organisation. What's stopping this happening? Because everyone seems to be on the same page. You talk to people across the game. You talk to people, within the game, be they players, etc. And everyone seems to want to see greater diversity. No one expresses that they don't want to see diversity. So who is preventing this?
I think it's too many silos. They're not joined up. A joined up collective workforce of football is going to be more powerful than individually, whether it's the FA, the LMA, the PFA. Actually, this should be a joint up proposal from the governing bodies to get together and recognise that there's issues here, not just in the male game, but also in the women's game. What can the joined up workforce do? And that might be simple things about alerting some of the ethnic coaches, managers about opportunities that are opening up at the club, but also letting the club know that this guy's looking for work and we actually support this guy because he's good at his job or this lady's good at the job. And I don't think that anybody should get a position just because you're black or you're a woman. You've got to be good enough first and foremost. What we are saying is that regardless of whether you're good, you're not getting the same opportunities as somebody else who's just because they're a different colour to you. And that can't be right.
Steve, as an academic, have the governing bodies been coming to you about your research? Do you feel that there is a bit more of a joined up approach that's beginning to take place? Or is, like Michael says, that's the missing part of this?
I think Michael's absolutely correct. I think that is the missing part of this. It's one of the recommendations that I've made in various reports that I've done over the years. And I'll give you a practical example of that in relation to the two initiatives that I spoke of. This year alone, there will be 140 better qualified BME coaches than there was 12 months ago, who, within the game, is informing clubs that those coaches exist, who is informing those players of opportunities that are emerging at clubs. It really isn't kind of rocket science. It needs a simple steering group from the relevant authorities to sit down and say, here is this ready list, which we will update on a regular basis and we will inform the clubs of. And also, the clubs, I think, need to have a more direct contact with the players themselves to learn about the different types of coaching opportunities that may or may not exist within the football environment. Because I find that there is sometimes a lack of understanding about the different roles, about the different phases, whether it's foundation or youth or professional development phase, whether it's about becoming a coach developer working for the FA. So there needs to be much more kind of knowledge exchange. But quite simply, bringing the bodies together, there's a kind of hole in the middle of all of these activities as they're presently emerging. Somebody needs to take responsibility. At the moment, each of those football authorities are taking responsibility for their one element. Yeah. Some of them aren't taking any responsibility for anything at all. Somebody in the middle of all of this needs to take control to organise all of this in a much more holistic and joined up way than presently exists.
Andrew, I'm going to continue my lobby to get you into coaching and management here. If you saw this coordination, if you believed in the people leading the coordination, would you then step back and consider being a coach or manager? Because
for me personally, first and foremost, you want to see, I want to see people who played before me given an opportunity. You know, and if I look at those people who have gone before me given an opportunity, then I'd have a rethink and say, oh, yeah, I would consider it. But I'm talking about there's been, I mean, some fantastic black players before me try to hand at management or try to get into management. They've been knocked back for whatever reason. So until I see changes then, me personally, do I see any point in doing it? I don't, I've got to be brutally honest.
Can I just jump in there as well, Leon? And for me, this is an important part of the jigsaw. So we've got here a man that scored at every level of English football, who's the third leading scorer in the Premier League. What could he give to the game, to the youngsters, black, white, Asian, you name it, women, about scoring goals, which is the game itself? It's the hardest part of the game. Yet, because of certain obstacles in his way, he's now saying, I'm going to step away from the game, which is a big loss to everybody connected to the game. And this is not just one person's story. You're talking about other people from other ethnic backgrounds that are repeating this scenario. The game is missing out on so much education, information from players that have played at the top level.
And that is reflected in the women's game. So many of the women's players retire and they have no interest in coaching. They all want to go into broadcast and punditry because of that very reason.
And it's a more viable option.
It really is.
However you look at it.
It really is.
I mean, it's an option that you're going to be given. At least you're going to be given a platform.
Yes. You get to share your views, and it's almost as fair. It's almost a fair. It's almost a level playing field in punditry. Whereas when you get to coaching, they're not interested.
Is there a case here to say that there's a communication issue here as well? If we're talking about communication with some of the players, former and current, because if what Dr. Bradbury is saying is there are things changing at academy level, that the FA are creating bursaries, that the EFL are creating a Rooney Rule equivalent that's being rolled out. You know, how do we ensure that the people who do want to go into those coaching and management roles take advantage of that? Is there a communication issue here, Andrew?
In what way? Because how long has this been going on? So when we talk about communicating, we can't have a breakdown over 20, 30 years. It's impossible. No, it is. Seriously, it's impossible. So when you're talking about breaking down communication, so no, I'm not having that. I can't.
Right. I'm going to give everyone the power. I'm going to make you the CEO of the FA, CEO of the Premier League, CEO of the EFL, you know, CEO of whoever you want. They make the change. You get one change. Or if you got 2 or 3, then I'll accept that as well, to be fair. What is the change that's needed to change this so we don't have to come back here next year and the year after to talk about this, but we talk about it maybe in a different way in terms of what progress has been made?
Okay, I work in the public sector. Now, the public sector, for the most part, observes the rules and regulations laid out in the Equality Act 2010 with respect to employment law and ensuring equality within workplace situations. Football doesn't exist in some kind of magical vacuum outside of society. The football industry, all of these stalls here, exist within society. And all of these businesses and professional football clubs have to legally adhere to proper equality legislation. Presently, they don't. What role is the government playing in ensuring that that is observed?
Jess?
Such a tough question, especially to say in public. My initial thought was sack everyone. But I realise that's probably not conducive to change. But what I would say is that there is the workforce and the gatekeepers that are in place are not doing their job. And I feel as though the gatekeepers that have control of who's employed across a workforce are comfortable. Because they're comfortable, they don't really want to bring about change. There's no desire. So for me, it would have to be, you have to change the kind of, the top of the structure, the hierarchy of the structure. And I would hope that that would filter down. Like once you diversify from the top, I think the diversity of the workforce further down would change as well. And I think essentially that's what you need. You need a diverse workforce to bring about diverse decisions and positivity, personally.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree with Jess. I think if I go back to Lord Davis's report a few years ago in the business sector, where there was an alarming shortage of women on boards in businesses, and he wanted to see an uplift to 20 or 25% within 5 years, and he got that. There were certain measures that were put in place, but there was a target set and it was met. I think that needs to be met now in football, where boards need to be more representative of the football in fraternity that they support. Not just what's playing, but also the fans as well. That's right across women, people from an ethnic minority background. It needs to be more reflective upstairs. And as Jess says, once you start to get that, then you get more of an understanding at board level of how do we do business better? How do we recruit better? How do we get fair processes better? At the minute, it's less than 1%. Less than 1% in all governing bodies of people from an ethnic background. Until that happens, we'll still be here in another 10, 20 years.
If I'm still here.
Andrew, I'm continuing this lobby. I've got you down now. Now I've got you down to one thing. What's the one thing that's going to see you in that dugout?
One thing, to be fair, I have to concur with everybody else here. But me personally, I would like to say, we should all be judged as equals. Simple as that. Forget the colour of your skin. Judged as equals. Not, he's my best mate, so that's why I'm giving him the job. I mean, for me, that's wrong straight away. If he's not the right man for the job because he's not credible enough for the job, or you don't think he's good enough coach for the job, he can't have the job. So let's pick the best man for the job. Until we start changing things like that, we're going to be stuck in a time warp.
Okay. Well, I was going to say thank you to the panel, but I kind of feel like there might be some questions out there. If there are, and if I'm allowed to, I haven't checked with the organisers, but I'd like to throw it out to the audience. Are there any questions for the panel? I'm going to come down and give you my mic if this is going to... Oh, there is one, sorry.
Hello, my name's Yamra. I work at Morgan Sports Law. My question is, what do you think about introducing quotas, so minimum requirements that have to be met, and is that possibly a way of addressing the concerns? And that's for anyone on the panel.
Can I take that? I'm not sure of the legal ramifications of issues around quotas. You may know more than me on this, but I think there's all sorts of kind of positive action measures supported or encouraged within the Equality Act, which could take place. Certainly in terms of coaching. I think where quotas may have a place is in terms of the governance issues. And other countries actually have been doing this for many, many years. The Norwegian FA was doing this in the 1970s around gender equity. We know that under the new Code of Sport Governance around gender representation, all governing bodies have to have at least a 70-30 split, one way or the other in terms of gender, and that's tied into funding. So actually maybe there is some kind of opportunities there. So the FA will have to do that in terms of gender representation. Well, the Code of Sport Governance only really concerns itself with gender representation and not ethnic representation, or in terms of other protected characteristics as defined in the Equality Act. So.
Anyone else on the panel? Quotas is quite a loaded word. It's become this loaded word. But when we call it targets, it seems to be more acceptable. And I don't know anyone who runs a business without targets. Would anyone else on the panel like to have a word on targets? And what targets are we working to?
Well, I think we're setting targets every year, aren't we? And at the moment, how well are we doing on the targets?
There's accountability on the targets. That's the real issue, as we've touched on.
Yeah, you could say that, but I'm mostly getting in trouble after this.
Well, we're all friends here, Andrew.
I'm too honest, man. I'm too honest. I mean, I don't know. You talk like quotas, targets. For me, it's still a farce. Ultimately, if people want to do things, they'll do it. It's as simple as that. And that's the world we live in. If someone wants to buy something, they'll buy it. So not for me personally.
Any other questions from the floor? Sean?
Hi, Sean from Law in Sport. You talked about the treatment of players essentially post-career. How much do you think that part of this problem is, as Michael put so well, that treating people as human beings, that the fact that the athletes are still being treated and particularly those from minority groups, as just like a nice to have. It's good for the team to a certain point, and then at the end of your career, see you later, rather than treated as individuals who can add more value to an organisation of any sort.
Michael, you may be a good person because you're working with Derby County and you're making a contribution on this very issue within your club.
Yeah, I think after your career is a big issue. There's lots of guys and ladies what are coming out of the game now and not understanding where they are in life. Sometimes you question the honesty and the integrity of the sport that you've loved, also the personalities that you've worked with. And all you want is that honest opinion about you as an individual. We're not all going to retire with 10, 15, 20 million in the bank. Some of these guys now need to go and get that next career after retiring at 35. And it's getting younger, the retirement ages. So if you're not thinking about life after football, it hits you in the face. And footballers at the minute have got the biggest rate in divorce after football, depression. There's mental issues. There's so many issues that come after life after football. And it can't all be put on football, but a large percent has to do with the environment and the culture of what that brings. So your question about that sort of period after the game is a critical one. There's not enough support for educational, because football's all you've played. So what work environment's going to pick you up at 35 and think, well, how can I re-employ him when you've got some people who have gone through university at 19, 20 and have had that experience in a different sector? So it's really difficult to bridge that gap between life after football if you don't get in the coaching, the manager, the scouting and recruitment side. And obviously, with what's happening to ethnic players, the high percentage of ethnic players are the ones that are not bridging that gap. Does that answer your question?
I mean, because I'll touch on it as well. For me personally, you know, the football club I'm involved in, Manchester United, have been absolutely unbelievable in looking after me since I've retired. You know, the previous manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, used to try and get me in, do my coaching badges. You know, he was on me every single day when I went in to say, look, Coley, get it done, get it done. Because obviously he believed in me that I could go on to the next level, whereby I'm saying to myself, I think there's going to be far too many obstacles for me. You know, whereby now I'm at Manchester United working as the ambassador role. You know, they want me to get involved in doing a little bit of work with the kids and all those kind of things. I'm fortunate. That they're prepared to do that, not just for me, but many more of the ex-Manchester United players, whereby other players of black and ethnic minority might struggle in getting into one of those kind of roles. You know, so it's very, very tough.
Question at the back, Simon.
I understand why you say you wouldn't do your coaching badges, but is that not giving executives an easy get out, not to appoint people?
No, it's not, because I'll give you one here. When I started my coaching badge, I had an ex-policeman, heading it up, okay? Then he told me how to play centre forward. What does that tell you? Now, I played centre forward for 20 odd years. So an ex-policeman who got all the qualification was telling me how I should play centre forward. So I'm saying to myself, no, I'm not being disrespectful. You can't tell me how to play centre forward, because I've done it for 20 years. I won't tell you how to be a policeman. So until we get away from things like that, we're going to continue to struggle, because I found that very disrespectful. You know, because I could never tell you how to be a policeman, so please don't tell me how to be a centre forward. So from that day, I said to myself, I don't think this coaching lark's for me. You know, because I want to be told by someone who's played the game and understands the game to tell me what I can improve on. Not someone who's not played the game and telling me, well, I wouldn't do this as centre forward. I wouldn't do. Half the things I did as a centre forward is off the cuff. But he's telling me how I should do it. His coach not different. Playing is totally different. Playing is totally different. I mean, because you have parameters. Your manager or your coach might say to you, okay, then these are parameters, try to do this, try to do that. But when you go across the white line, you play football, a lot of it becomes natural. Yeah, you're giving guidelines, and you work within those guidelines, but if you speak to most people, oh, how do you do that? I don't know, I didn't think about it. I just did it. Now, for me to explain that to someone else, how do you do it? I'm like, well, I did this, and you might not see it, but I see it because that's what I do.
Got a question at the back, sir?
Hello, my name is Sheriff. I'm from Biggleswade United. I just want to touch on the coaching badge that Andy talked about. So you're a former professional player, so I understand your experience, but as someone who didn't play football professionally, I think there's a catch-22 scenario here. So I've done my UFAB coaching license, but there's a natural roadblock for me to progress. And I say this because I know people who I was on the same course with, which is about 3 years ago, they've gone on to do UFA license. Now, for you to be eligible to do a UFA license, you need experience. You need to be attached to a club playing 11-a-side consistently. Now, I can't get that because of the same thing issues we're talking about today. So, from your question talking about, is he giving the board an excuse not to, but from my own perspective, I can't even get on the ladder. So how do you solve that problem?
Let's just say that was has been a consistent finding. Your story has been a consistent finding amongst the grassroots coaches that I've spoken to, who are UEFA B qualified, but who can't get onto a UEFA A course because they're not situated at a professional club. You can't get to a professional club unless you've got, often they say the B licence, but actually the A licence. So there is a catch-22 situation. And it's a difficult one to break down, and one that is especially the case for coaches like yourself that are coming from non-professional playing backgrounds. It's also the case that to get onto UEFA courses, because UEFA A courses, because there are so few and they fill up so rapidly, that, as I'm sure you find, you often drop down the list because those clubs, those coaches who are at clubs get onto those courses because the clubs themselves have to have X amount of A licence courses to meet their EPPP requirements. So you're absolutely right, there is a glitch in the system there, which impacts more, I think, on some than others.
Thank you. One last question from the floor. I know there was a question down here.
Hi there. I was just thinking if there needs to be more transparency in the decision making when it comes to managers and that level. So therefore, the public can see what the board are thinking, and therefore, if the right candidate's been overlooked because of their colour or gender, the public can actually have a say. So would that be a solution, or would there be challenges to that?
Is that with respect to having a proper process, a thorough process to getting a job as a manager or coach?
Yeah, massively. As far as I know at the moment, that doesn't exist in men's or women's football, because often when a team sacks a manager, they know who they want to replace them straight away, and it's usually a mate or someone in their old boys network. So that completely and utterly just annihilates fair and proper process. And also they can do that, and who holds them to account? Who says that they can't employ their best mate in that managerial role? As far as I'm aware, there's no one, because these are private businesses that ultimately are accountable to themselves and the board members who they make profit for.
Playing devil's advocate, you're Birmingham, you haven't got long, you might go down, you call in Harry Redknapp. Is there space for a system at a point like that, or is that just an exception to a rule that should already be in place?
Do you want me to take?
Yeah, go on, John.
I think that there needs to be a process where managers are prepared and ready and waiting. We spoke about there was a ready list. I don't see that ready list being implemented where there's managers of ethnic backgrounds who are ready, already prepared to go and meet somebody within the drop of a hat. Because there's a shortage of ethnic managers. So we need to get ethnic managers ready to go and approach the clubs via a governing body who's supporting them and saying, you need a manager today. We've got a list of 10, 15 qualified managers who would love to be part of your recruitment process, at least an interview. Now, I know that the theory of, well, okay, we might just interview them just to tick a box. But actually, managers ain't even getting up to the point of getting an interview. So at least this might be a process of trying to get people from an ethnic background into an interview process. And then there's a number of things that can happen. Number one, they might change the mindset of the person across the other side of the table. Number two, there's opportunities for feedback. And number three, going back to your question, if there's 10 managers, 10 jobs, and there's been 10 managers being recruited that are white, then there might be a possibility to say, hold on, we've had 10 managers, 10 jobs gone, there's 10 opportunities for the game to recruit from a different background. Let's hold you to account what is going on here. At the minute, there is absolutely nothing. I couldn't tell you if the German Shepherd had an interview last week or it was Sven going, I don't know.
The German Shepherd definitely didn't.
He'd probably get an interview in front of me. but that's the process.
Okay, it looks like we've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their honesty, their energy and their ideas. You know, these are uncomfortable conversations. They're difficult conversations to have out loud. A lot of these conversations happen behind closed doors. So to come out here and talk openly like this, I think is only good because it moves us all forward. If we're feeling uncomfortable, we're likely to go away and think about this a little bit more. So thank you to all the panelists, Dr. Bradbury, Jessica Crichton, Michael Johnson and Andrew Cole. Thank you.
Thank you.